Hey everybody, this week's First Chapter Friday is Keeper by Mal Peet. So this is a soccer book. It is a really, really good story, especially if you like learning about how people overcome challenges, especially if they come from different parts of the world. So I'm going to go ahead and read you a little bit of the description because I'm not sure that the first chapter really fully orients us to what's happening. So here is the description of this book. When Paul Faustino of La Nacion flips on his tape recorder for an exclusive interview with El Gato, the phenomenal goalkeeper who single-handedly won his team the World Cup, the seasoned reporter quickly learns that this will be no ordinary story. Instead, the legendary El Gato narrates a spellbinding tale that begins in the South American rainforest, where a ghostly but very real mentor, the keeper, emerges to teach a poor boy about the most thrilling secrets of the game. So now we will start with chapter 1. Paul Faustino slid a blank cassette into the tape recorder and stabbed at a couple of buttons. Then he slapped the machine and said, "Who is the top soccer writer in South America? Who is the #1 soccer writer in South America?" The man looking out of the window didn't turn around. There was a smile in his voice when he said, "I don't know, Paul." "Who?" "Me. I am. And will the boss buy me a decent tape recorder? No, she will not." He slapped the machine again, and a green light came on the display. Faustino immediately sat down in front of the small microphone and spoke into it. Testing, date, August 2nd. Tape 1. Interview, Paul Faustino of La Nacion talks to the greatest goalkeeper in the history of the world. The man who 2 days ago took in his hands the World Cup in front of 80,000 fans and 220 million TV viewers. He jabbed buttons, rewound the tape, and played it back. Faustino's office was on the 7th floor of a block perched on one of the hills that looked down on the city. The big man standing at the window found it easy enough to imagine himself a hawk coasting over the grid of buildings and the drifting white and red lights of the traffic. Somewhere beyond the carpet of lights and just below the edge of the stars was the forest. He was tall, exactly 6 feet, 4 inches, and heavy with it. But when he turned from the window and went to the table where Faustino was sitting, his movements were light and quick, and it seemed to the soccer writer that the big man had somehow glided across the room and into the chair opposite his. "Are you ready to begin, Gato?" Faustino had his finger on the pause button. On the table between them, there was a desk lamp that threw hard shadows onto the faces of the two men. There were also 2 bottles of water, a pitcher filled with ice, Faustino's pack of cigarettes, and a not very tall chunk of gold. It was in the shape of 2 figures wearing what looked like nightgowns, supporting a globe. It was not very beautiful. From where Faustino was sitting, it looked rather like an alien with an oversized bald head, and every soccer player in the world wanted it. The World Cup. It burned in the lamplight. The big man folded his huge hands together on the tabletop. "So, where shall we begin?" he said. "With some background stuff, if that's all right with you," said Faustino. He lifted his finger from the button, and the tape began to run. "Tell me about where you grew up." "At the edge of the world. That's how it seemed to me. A red, dusty road came from somewhere and passed through our town. Then it went on to the edge of the forest, where the men were cutting down the trees. And beyond the edge of the forest, there was nothing. Or that is what my father told me. He meant that the forest seemed to go on forever from there. Each day at dawn, a number of trucks stopped at the top of the town where the men were waiting. My father was one of them, and he climbed up into a truck and went off to work, cutting down the trees. He sometimes came home and told us stories, like how his team had cut down a really big one, and how the monkeys who had lived in it had stayed clinging to the top branches almost until they hit the ground, and how they ran howling into the deeper forest with babies hanging off their bellies. I didn't know if that or any of the other stuff he told me was true or not, but I grew up listening to his stories and loving them. So perhaps, in spite of everything he did to try and stop me, it was my father who set me on the path that brought me to where I am today. During the day, the big yellow tractors that hauled the logs back down the road growled past the town in clouds of red dust that lifted into the square, the plaza, where we played soccer. It was just a big patch of ground between the tin church and the cafe. No grass. We had games that started as soon as we were out of school and didn't end until our fathers came back in the trucks and the darkness was falling. We were all crazy for soccer, of course. Actually, it was not just us kids who were obsessed with soccer. The whole place was. The cafe had a TV and everyone squeezed in there to watch the big matches. The walls were covered with posters and photos. Our players, German, Spanish, and English players. Great players. And teams from the past. And after a big match, even if it was dark, even if it was raining, we would run to the plaza to replay the action, calling ourselves by the names and nicknames of the great stars. Pele, the Gray Ghost, Little Bird, Maradona, whatever. And you were El Gato, the cat, said Paul Faustino. The big goalkeeper smiled. Oh, no, not then, he said. You see, I was useless. I couldn't play. The other kids could do great things with the ball. Take it out of the air on the top of their foot, run and keep it in the air with the head, score goals with bicycle kicks, stuff like that. I could do none of this. When the ball came to me, which wasn't often, the other kids made sure of that. It always seemed to get stuck between my ankles or bounce off my knees. I had no balance. A soft tackle from a smaller kid would send me staggering like a drunk goat. I was too tall. I had long, skinny arms and legs and big, clumsy hands. They called me the stork, which was fair enough. Faustino was a little puzzled. But you played in goal, surely, he said. Oh no, never occurred to me. I dreamed of being a forward, of slamming in perfect shots that brought imaginary crowds roaring to their feet. We all did. Besides, there were two big, strong kids who were always the goalies. So I just got pushed further and further out to the edge of the game. And even then, if the ball happened to come toward me, the nearest player on my side would yell, "Leave it," and then would take the ball instead. One day, I played for 2 hours and I didn't touch the ball once, except for when it hit me on the backside by chance. That was the day I decided to give up soccer. I was 13. All the same, Faustino said dryly, you've played a game or two since. The goalkeeper smiled again. Oh, yes. My retirement was a bit premature, as it turned out, but I never played in the plaza again, and it was giving up soccer that made me a soccer player. You lost me, Faustino said. What does that mean? Giving up soccer made me a soccer player? I was learning nothing in the plaza. If I hadn't quit, I wouldn't have gone into the forest, which is where I learned everything. I get the feeling, Faustino said with a sigh, that I'm not going to get answers by asking questions. So tell me the story. Tell me how a non-player passes the time in a soccer-crazy jungle town. All right, so chapter 1 of this book is a little bit long, so we're going to cut it off right there. After that, we do get the rest of the story, and we learn how this guy became such a great, great soccer player to the point that he won the World Cup by learning some very interesting lessons from the jungle in his own native area. So if you are interested in soccer, or if you just want to read a cool story about a different sort of lifestyle than what you are accustomed to, come by the library and check out Keeper.